There is an old saying in the legal world that the Department of Justice doesn't just represent a president, it represents the majesty of the law itself. It is an institution built on the idea of stability, of rigorous process, and above all, of credibility when its lawyers walk into a federal courtroom. But what happens when that credibility isn't just damaged? What happens when it is set on fire, mocked by its own leadership, and then reduced to a series of oopsie filings that would make a first-year law student blush? Tonight, we are tracking what can only be described as a total institutional collapse inside the Trump Department of Justice. As we speak, a mass exodus is underway. The talent is fleeing. The career professionals who know how to actually navigate a courtroom are being pushed out or are sprinting for the exits. And in their place, we're seeing the arrival of a new kind of lawyering, a kind of legal strategy that is so chaotic, so incoherent, and so blatantly political that it is starting to look less like a Department of Justice and more like the gang that couldn't shoot straight. We are talking about a legal flip-flop so embarrassing that it has left federal judges stunned and the legal community wondering if there is anyone left at the DOJ who even knows how to read a calendar, let alone a constitutional brief. This isn't just a mistake. It is a symptom of a deeper, more dangerous rot, and it all centers around a specific, vengeful plot to target American law firms, a plot that just blew up in the government's face in the most humiliating way possible. To understand the absolute mess the DOJ just made in the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals, you first have to understand the weapon that was used to start this fight. We are talking about a series of executive orders issued by the Trump regime that were, quite frankly, unprecedented. They didn't target foreign adversaries. They didn't target criminal syndicates. They targeted American law firms. But not just any law firms. These were specific targets, firms that had represented people Donald Trump didn't like, firms that had lawyers on staff who had previously won cases against him. This was a classic, old-school shakedown. The strategy was simple. Use the power of the federal government to coerce these massive legal institutions into bending the knee. If you wanted to keep your government contracts, if you wanted to keep your security clearances, you had to play ball. You had to stop your DEI programs. You had to do the pro bono work the president told you to do. And for many of these firms, 9 of the biggest ones, in fact, it worked. They buckled. They entered into massive settlements. They traded their credibility for a quiet life. But then there were the others, the Defiant Four. 4 prominent law firms looked at these executive orders, looked at the Constitution, and said no. They filed lawsuits. They argued that it is fundamentally unconstitutional for a president to target private lawyers simply because he doesn't like who their clients are. And when these cases landed on the desk of federal judges, most notably Judge Beryl Howell, the Trump regime didn't just lose, they were excoriated. Judge after judge looked at these orders and saw them for exactly what they were, a frivolous, unconstitutional abuse of power. So what does a normal Department of Justice do when they get humiliated in a lower court on a case they know is a loser? They take the L. They walk away. They preserve what little dignity they have left. But as we are about to see, this is not a normal Department of Justice, because someone very high up, decided that losing wasn't enough. They wanted a catastrophe. Now, imagine you are a clerk at the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals. You are used to seeing the most polished, sophisticated legal arguments in the country. Then this morning, you open a file from the Department of Justice, the highest law enforcement agency in the land, and you see this. It is a motion to withdraw, a motion to voluntarily dismiss appeals. If that sounds incredibly confusing, that's because it is. Let's break down the sheer, unadulterated whiplash that just occurred in the last 24 hours. First, the Trump DOJ, realizing they were headed for a catastrophic loss on these unconstitutional executive orders, did the sensible thing. They filed a motion to dismiss their own appeal. They essentially said, "We're done. We take the L. We're walking away." The legal community breathed a sigh of relief. Maybe, just maybe, there was a scintilla of a brain cell left at the DOJ that realized attacking the most prominent law firms in America was a bad look. But then, mere hours later, the oopsies happened. The DOJ went back to the court and said, "Wait, Ignore that thing we just filed. We didn't mean it. We want to keep the appeal going. Think about the level of institutional rot required for this to happen. You file a legal document saying the case is over. Then you file another document saying, just kidding, we're actually coming back for more. This isn't just embarrassing. It is a legal meat grinder for anyone who puts their name on these documents. When you tell a court you want to dismiss a case because it's a loser, and then you try to undismiss it a few hours later, you have literally zero credibility left. Who wrote this? Was it a human being? Was it ChatGPT? Or was it something much more cynical? Because the firms on the other side of this, the firms that the government is trying to bully, they aren't playing around. They've already filed their response. They are telling the court that this unexplained about face is sanctionable conduct. They are asking the judges to take serious action against the lawyers who are signing these papers. This is the gang that couldn't shoot straight in real time. And as we're about to find out, the reason for this chaos isn't a legal mistake. It's a political order coming from the very top. When you see a legal disaster of this magnitude, a U-turn so sharp it leaves tire marks on the courtroom floor, you have to ask the most important question in Washington. Who gave the order? Because a career DOJ lawyer doesn't just wake up and decide to humiliate themselves in front of the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals for fun. The reality is that the talented, principled lawyers at the DOJ are gone. They've been replaced by a new guard, people willing to put their names on filings that are the legal equivalent of a suicide mission. And according to our analysis, there is only one explanation for this oopsie moment: political muscle. Think about the timeline. Yesterday morning, the DOJ does the sensible thing and withdraws the appeal. They admit they're going to get clobbered. But then, a few hours later, the Wall Street Journal breaks the story. The news hits the headlines. Trump DOJ surrenders to law firms. And that's when the muscle stepped in. We're not talking about legal strategy here. We're talking about a political reaction. Whether it was Pam Bondi or Todd Blanche or the occupant of the Oval Office himself, someone saw that headline and screamed, "What the hell are you doing? You look like you're turning tail. You look like you're losing." So the order goes down. Change it now. And the poor souls left at the DOJ have to scurry back to court and file a document that basically says, we know we said we were done, but we're actually not done because reasons. They are choosing to look like the gang that couldn't shoot straight rather than look like they've surrendered. They would rather be seen as incompetent than seen as reasonable. And here's the kicker. They are still going to lose. They were clobbered in the lower court because these executive orders are a dumpster fire of First and Sixth Amendment violations. They are trying to force law firms to drop DEI programs and do the president's bidding, and the courts aren't having it. By reversing course, they haven't saved the case. They've just guaranteed that when they will lose in the most humiliating, high-profile way possible, with Judge Beryl Howell and the D.C. Circuit watching every desperate amateur move they make. In the end, this isn't just about a few law firms or a single motion to withdraw. It is a terrifying preview of what it looks like when an administration values looking tough over being right. What we are watching at the Department of Justice is a cycle of institutional scarring. Donald Trump has a unique, almost supernatural ability to take a problem, make it a bigger problem, and then make it everyone's problem. He turns simple legal errors into constitutional catastrophes. He turns a sensible withdrawal into a humiliating public debacle. And then he spends all his time blaming the very people he forced to carry out his orders. This is the Trump doctrine in action. You don't just lose. You lose in a way that burns down the credibility of the institution you are supposed to be leading. The lawyers who signed those papers today, the ones who had to type out the words "ignore our previous dismissal," they didn't just lose a case. They knowingly put themselves through a legal meat grinder. They traded their professional reputations for a political stunt that is destined to fail. And as the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals prepares to tear these arguments apart, we have to ask ourselves, how many more institutions are going to be hollowed out like this? How many more career professionals will be replaced by yes men willing to file oopsie motions at the stroke of midnight? This is what independent media is for, to shine a light on the rot before it spreads. We are tracking every filing, every exodus, and every unconstitutional power grab right here. If you value this kind of deep dive analysis and want to stay ahead of the chaos, you need to be part of this community. We are pushing for 7 million subscribers on this channel, and we need your help to get there. Hit that subscribe button, like this video, and consider becoming a paid member of RS Briefing to support independent journalism that isn't afraid to call out the gang that couldn't shoot straight. Unlock our exclusive content, ad-free videos, and custom emojis by clicking the join button below. Let's keep growing this movement together. This has been your RS Briefing. Thank you for watching.